Hello, and welcome to the Anime Explorations podcast. My name is Alex.
I'm Tora.
I'm David.
And this is a monthly anime book club podcast where we talk about a movie, anime film, or series, or in this case, portion of a series, having talked about the other half last month, and give our thoughts about it and discuss it in a book club fashion. Normally, at the start of each episode, we do talk a little bit up front about what we've been watching and any anime news that's happened over the past month, or anime-adjacent news over the past month that's worth talking about. So, the spring anime season is slowly wrapping up. I've finished watching Delicious in Dungeon, which was excellent, and I'm very glad we're getting a second season.
Yay! Dungeon Meshes the bomb.
Also finished watching the conclusion of the new Urusei Yatsura series, which was on High Dive, which has been great. Apparently, there are rumblings that we are getting a new Ranma 1/2 series in the same line as this, which, on the one hand, I'm really interested to see a new Ranma 1/2. The old series was certainly great. I grew up watching it and enjoyed it a great deal. It definitely had some issues with filler because it was coming out contemporaneously with the manga, and the anime series finished before the manga did, so they weren't properly able to get into what the ending of the manga was. On the other hand, this feels weird to say, but nudity was kind of a significant part of that show in terms of it's a fan service series with a fair number of nudity, but it's one coming from a female mangaka, so it doesn't feel as gross as when some other shows do it.
For the most part.
For the most part. I mean, yes, there is Haposai and everything related to him, and Haposai is the worst, and I feel like we got more of him in the filler arcs of the anime than we did in the manga, so hopefully new series will have less Haposai.
I love Rumiko Takahashi's work, but going back to it at this age, there's always that kind of element of cringe,
This was a product of its time, and I fully recognize that times are different now, but yeesh.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just, I fully enjoyed Ranma growing up. I didn't watch much of the anime. Saw the two movies, rented those out of the Blockbuster, and mainly the Ranma I know is out of the manga, which local library had. But there's sweet time and society have moved on, and there's a lot of things that if you're going to do Ranma 1/2 today, you have to be very careful about. Both in terms of gender identity, as for those of our audience who haven't seen Ranma 1/2, the main character, Ranma Sayotome, has been cursed so that whenever he is splashed with cold water, he becomes she. And
hot water changes back.
Yeah, hot water changes her back into him. And there are just a lot of
there's a lot of
unfortunate joking that goes on.
There's a lot of resolution on Ranma's part that he is a dude no matter what, and it comes off as slightly homophobic.
There's a lot with Ranma 1/2.
True. I think also, on the other hand, there has been serious academic scholarship in relation to the anime community, in terms of people who have written articles in peer-reviewed journals and scholastic collections of essays, as in collections of scholarly essays, not scholastic as in carried at book fairs. But about Ranma 1/2 and transgender readings of the character. And it's interesting watching Urusei Yatsura. Urusei Yatsura has a couple characters who fit in, who are feel like dry runs of some of the stuff that Takahashi tries to do in Ranma 1/2. There is the daughter of the guy running the school store who's raised as a boy and did not get to experience anything related to the female gender roles that she would have otherwise wanted to experience. And so there's elements of the plot related to that where, as incorporated into the more recent series, in having not read the original manga, or the earlier anime adaptation, feels like they've definitely, the people making the show at Studio David, who also did JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, definitely took a look at these material from the context of where we are now and looked at earlier, we said, there's really good stuff here. How do we go down to the root of this and maintain the core concept and who these characters are while not getting into the homophobic, misogynist, or transphobic reads that those could have had from the time. And also, like, honestly, for what it's worth, when, as a college student, I was introduced through reading stuff online and through people I knew about the ideas of gender fluidity and gender dysphoria and being transgender and that sort of thing, I was better able. I feel like I was better able to handle it or not handle it, but wrap my brain around it through the context of, in middle school and early high school, having read manga of Ranma 1/2 that I checked out from the library, or having gotten the VHS tapes from the libraries of the TV series as well, and gone, okay, I understand this idea of being in a body that does not, where the assigned gender doesn't represent my mental gender identity, and that works. And so when that comes up when people talk about their experiences being trans and in real life, like, okay, I know this is not the same thing as, like, obviously Round 1/2, but I get but I understand where this is coming from. And I have encountered a few blurbles on social media of people who were trans basically having their egg cracking moment watching Ranma 1/2, especially the cat's tongue arc when Rama's stuck in female form and cannot change back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it can't be handled well. I'm saying I have concerns.
Agreed. Like, if the Urusei Yatsura series is a good example, I think that's a strong point in its favor. The other weird thing, I guess, in terms of how this might be handled is there's a lot of nudity in the original series. The way nudity, particularly female nudity, shows up in modern anime has gotten weird. In the sense of, like the original Ranma 1/2 anime series just aired on, like, over the air, and there's lots of boobs in that.
There was, but I will say, for the most part, Ranma is definitely the biggest offender when it comes to being naked.
Yep.
When he is in his female form. But in that case, for him at least, there's no sexual aspect of the nudity.
Yeah,
Agreed.
This is another of those things when you're like, this is going to cause problems in an adaptation, but, as a young woman, it was liberating to see, like, well, he's a dude, he doesn't care if his chest is showing. And it's like, well, as a woman, why do I care if my chest is showing? Like, this societal construct that we've created around nudity. So it was interesting in that way as well.
True. And I think is with the way that nudity has been depicted in anime more recently, where not just they become much more sexualized, but also in a sense of, like, the spaces where either sexualized or even just non-sexualized nudity would just come up in other shows, there is not spaces for them anymore. It's been shunted to, like, if you're going to have nudity in an anime, you can't show it on broadcast television or what have you. So if you're going to do nudity, you might as well be doing a full-on heavy fan service heavy series, or potentially something that is borderline pornographic, like, say, harem, any of the harem in another world, harem isekai shows that take cues from rants, where they will have, or those shows will then go on and have on like the pay chat, like be air again on the pay channels or on a pay-per-view channel with all of any censorship around that nudity removed, or have an uncensored version on the home video release for that reason. And they said they lean way more into objectification or sexualization or just that sort of thing. And it feels like there isn't a good place for that, for the Ranma 1/2 level of there is nudity.
No casual nudity.
There's actual nudity. It is, to a degree, somewhat sexualized in parts. It is plot relevant nudity, at least of more than a few occasions. Mm-hmm. And we don't, but we don't have an opportunity to get, but we can't show that on over-the-air television. So we want to have, so we then have to compete with the far more hornier shows on cable and that sort of thing.
It's important to note for those who haven't been exposed to it, Ranma's a comedy.
Yeah, Ranma is a it's a action slapstick comedy, and
yes.
It ran in the same magazine as Detective Conan and Hayate the Combat Butler and other shows. We ran a weekly Shonen Sunday, which has basically been where most of Rumiko Takahashi's stuff, including Inuyasha and Mao and that sort of thing, has run. So, like it's a shonen rom-com action series.
Ron was Santoma at the Santoma School of Anything Goes martial arts.
Yeah,
all my best.
Yeah, and the action part very much plays into the show and the manga. They have all these really great arcs based around really over-the-top martial arts, that sort of thing. And I wonder if perhaps to compensate for this, they will end up leaning more heavily into that side of the series. But in the process, potentially causing a degree of downplaying of the rom-com side of things, which is also where the more risque elements come up.
I don't know. I mean, it's like Ranma, like they can do some creative editing around the nudity, and Ranma could also fit really well into that, the more modern, action-y harem animes. Because Ranma is surrounded by a bevy of beautiful young women, a number of whom are either romantically interested in him or betrothed to him.
But then there's also like a reverse harem aspect because there are all these dudes that are interested in his
betrothed
female version.
Oh,
or
God, that's right.
His betrothed, yeah.
Oh, God.
Remember these recurring characters, like, there's a lot of comedy around them, not realizing that male Ranma and female Ranma are the same. Or resolutely refusing to realize it in a lot of cases.
Oh God, the siblings. The opposite sex siblings. Where each of them is attracted to the opposite sex Ranma and hates the same sex Ranma.
Yes, Tatawaki Kuno and Kodachi Kuno.
Yes!
So you see the sitcom aspects.
Yeah, so like I'm really interested to see how this works out. As you can imagine, Ranma 1/2 is a series that spawned massive amounts of doujinshi back in the day, of basically every stripe that exists, more or less.
Every relationship combination.
Fandom pool is more of a fandom ocean.
Oh yes. And like in terms of doujinshi, in terms of fanfic, you had multiple fanfic sites with thousands to hundreds of thousands of different fanfics, all with different relationship combinations and different levels of tone, for whatever ship you would want for Ranma 1/2. It has, at least in the U.S., one of the most fervent, passionate chunks of anime fandom in the history of fandom, and that's the other part of it to see is if we get a new Ranma 1/2, will lightning strike twice? Because on the one hand, I can see this not quite landing. On the other hand, I could see Tumblr seeing the new Ranma 1/2 and seeing it breaking out from anime Tumblr to queer Tumblr and everything else Tumblr, and it just taking over the site the way Supernatural did back in the day.
Quick shout out to Tumblr. I'm still on Tumblr. I love Tumblr. I'm so happy that Tumblr is still alive and active.
So am I. Both.
I don't think we'll get super Hulock levels, but
we can hope.
We can definitely hope. Do you know what studio is behind it?
I think it's David again. David Productions again. So interested to see. I'll have to double check later. Interesting to see how this turns out. The other bit of anime news. Pour one out for Gainax. Or at least the shambling corpse of the Studio Gainax. Probably I would call it the Mushi Productions of its day.
Cute funeral march. In
terms of to go back to our discussion of Shirobako for a bit, there's that flashback series or chunk we have where we see the studio that did Andy's Chucky, and it's modeled after Mushi Productions, one of the spin-off studios that Osamu Tezuka created, and which produced a whole bunch of great art and great artists and then crashed and burned. And I would say Gainax is very much the same thing. If you look at its body of work, it's not a large body of work in terms of quantity, but the quality of a lot of those is extraordinary.
And you have influence.
Highly influential.
And the influence you have. You have Gunbuster. You have Nadia. You have Evangelion. You had Royal Space Force. You had Fukuri. You had Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt. And all of this led to much as what happened with Madhouse spinning out of Mushi Productions and that sort of thing. We got out what we've seen come out of Gainax. We've gotten Studio Trigger. We've gotten Studio Kara. While A1 Pictures has been a bit of a mixed bag in in terms of the quality of their work, a lot of talent from Gainax basically went and spun it and headed out over to A1 Pictures. So say what you will about Darling in the Franxx as a series. I was amused to find that the novel Iron Widow would not exist if the author had not watched Darling in the Franxx and gone, I can do this better.
I can see that.
Major shout out to that series and that author, by the way. She is incredible. The book is incredible. I am eagerly awaiting the sequel.
I can genuinely say, out of the 24 episodes of Darling in the Franxx, I saw the first 22. Kind of lost interest, and I heard it royally messed up the ending, so I'm like, you know what, I'm good having missed that.
I watched the whole thing. The last 2 episodes basically went, what if we turned this into the finish of Gunbuster and Gunbuster 2? Which, having seen being one of the people out there is yeah, I liked Gunbuster 2. I was okay with that. And it's the issues that Darling in the Franxx has, I think, are related to a fumbling of the sexual politics of the subject matter that they are trying to do. They come close at a few points to getting it, and then they trip over their own feet.
Honestly, a lot of Darling in the Franxx problems are the same problems that we saw come up all the time in Studio Gainax originally, where they have so much symbolism and so much worked in that they don't quite get it right. They come close a lot, but there's a lot of times when you try and look at the deeper meanings behind the things they're showing, and they just they don't quite get it. Darling in the Franxx did a better job than Evangelion did with Christian imagery, but I feel like they should have gotten a couple of PhDs to look over and fix it up a little.
Yeah. I remember writing a review of Darling in the Franxx for my blog for the blog, and basically going, this is for good and for ill, the Gainax reunion, the equivalent of the Gainax reunion tour. It is almost the equivalent of being shut up and play the hits, without necessarily a reassessment for the people performing it of what the hits are and were. It's the equivalent of like David Lee Roth in his 50s or 60s coming back out on stage to sing songs that he wrote when he was in his late teens, early 20s, about having sex and picking up women and having sex with them who were, at the time he wrote the songs, close to his age, and singing the same lyrics without reassessment of the fact that he's singing lyrics about having sex with women now old enough to, or young enough, I should say, to be his grandchildren.
Sometimes reflection is helpful.
Indeed. So, with having covered those bases, let's move on to the second half of Diamond is Unbreakable.
Woo!
The better half. I'm pretty comfortable saying that.
I don't know if I'd call it the better half. I would definitely say it is the more focused half.
For the most part.
Agreed. There is a sense here of like it's more focused in some ways than others. Like there is the larger chunk of the issue with the whole Kawajiri family, and specifically with the whole idea here of our main antagonist, Yoshikage Kagekura, finally gets confronted by our main protagonist, nearly beaten, but he manages to get away and steal another person's identity. We don't know who that is. They don't know who that is originally. We're fairly quickly introduced to who that person is. Person by the name of Kosaku Kawajiri. And that person, unlike everyone other identities taken previously, rather than living alone, has a family. And he has to cope with living with that family. And I think this is actually where the series, like, if I'm going to pick a point, say here's where it gets closest to Twin Peaks, it's actually this, because it gets really close to. Spoilers for Twin Peaks here, real fast. I think I got into the spoiler last episode, but we'll repeat this here. So, Laura Palmer got murdered by her dad, Leland, who was under the control / of an entity known as Bob. And when we see some of this family dynamic in the film Fire Walk with Me, which is about the last week leading up to Laura Palmer's death, we get the sense of the family dynamic of the Palmer family. And there's this very strong undercurrent to current at various, as it ebbs and flows, of menace over interactions in the Palmer household. And the Twin Peaks and Fire Walk with Me got really big in Japan, and I could definitely with these, when we go see the life inside the Kawajiri house, we really get that sense of menace here, of this underlooming menace of, we have the paranoia of the son in the family, Hayato, who's like, my dad has changed, and in a way that I don't trust and I don't feel comfortable with. And
see, I had a completely different reference to this. And I went on the wiki and I read that the mangaka was actually inspired by a Philip K. Dick short story. And as soon as I read that, I was like, aha, that's where I've seen this before. I've read a lot of science fiction. But yeah, this feeling that one of your family members has been replaced by something or someone else. And the tension of that. I also want to point out the absolute genius of the fact that Kira's stand is all about bombs, and he becomes the bomb waiting to go off for Hayato, for this family. Right? He is literally the bomb under the table.
Yeah, like there is like every scene within this family, there's this constant sense of tension. On the one hand, you have Shinobu who's like, oh, my previously cold and emotionally distant husband has become much more seemingly engaged, and I like that about him. But her not necessarily picking up why, or choosing to ignore those aspects of things in favor of the stuff that she wants, and is appealing to her.
Yep, she has kind of the opposite reaction to her son. Instead of like, something is off about this family member, she's like, this family member is definitely different, but I am into that. Like,
He's finally made the changes I've been wanting for so long.
All of a sudden, I'm attracted to him again. Like, she is having a fantastic time, which gives Hayato another layer of conflict because he can see that his mom is happy for the first time in a long time.
Yeah. And then, however, where this gets kind of loses focus, I think, is with how the stands of the stand wielders of the story arc, the subsequent ones, get introduced after this, because we get the introduction of an antagonist of Kira's dad.
So I would like to point out, again, another parallel, that Kira's dad is the second stand that we've seen that uses Polaroids, the first one being Joseph's, and it's the second father figure that we've seen whose stand uses Polaroids. I just thought that was an interesting parallel.
It was. And it was an interesting concept. It's the problem is like basically what Yoshihiro Akira ends up doing for the majority of the series is being stuck in a Polaroid picture with the stand arrow, zipping around, stabbing people with it, causing them to get stands, which then our main characters have to fight. More or less in an attempt to draw them off from further investigating where Yoshikage Kira is.
His heart's in a good place, but man, dude, you got problems.
His heart isn't in a good place.
Well, okay, so he's doing everything out of love for his son, but he knows his son is a killer. I'm not condoning his actions by any metric.
I don't know if it's out of love for his son or just out of familial responsibility to protect his son.
There is a vague mention that Kira's mother may have abused him, and the dad's kind of stood by and let it happen. And so now he's acting out of guilt. But honestly, that's not really fleshed out enough to be relevant.
I don't think the motivation is fleshed out.
So he's just a ghost in a Polaroid flying around going, my son!
Yeah, that is the core problem with the character, at least as depicted in the anime, is basically he is introduced in a story arc, zipping around in a Polaroid picture, hanging on to an arrow, going, my son, I must protect my son. I will stab this cat and protect my son by giving it a stand. I will stab this biker dude. I will stab I will stab this telephone pole, or this high voltage power line.
There's a sense of like one-upmanship that's going on. Like the manga artist is like, he's made a lot of stands at this point, and he's like, what's next? It's not enough now to have an animal become a stand user. Instead, let's have an animal be stabbed with the arrow and then die and resurrected as a plant monster. Like,
Stand.
It just keeps getting crazier. But
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, it's like, and like some of these stories are legitimately good in terms of like the way they structure the stand battles. everything with like the whole storyline with Enigma feels like all the fun stuff that they did with the Darby brothers in Stardust Crusaders, and taking that and going, okay, how do we up the psychological battle with this?
This is the most menacing a Shredder has ever been. I was like, oh no, you didn't! Sorry, that statement might require context. This guy can turn things into sheets of paper, and then he literally puts them into a shredder that he unfolds from a sheet of paper. So you got people going into the shredder. It's crazy.
The Ninja Turtles thought their shredder was menacing.
Right? There's also some really fun characters introduced. I really liked the biker gang guy and his 3 groupies.
Highway Star, yeah.
Yuya?
Let me look that up real quick.
Fushiguro.
Yeah, Yuya Fungami.
Fungami. He was great. And one of the things I really liked about the second half of the season is that characters are put together in interesting ways, right? So in the Highway Star Adventure, you have Josuke and Rohan together, and they're hilarious because Rohan hates Josuke. When they're first facing off against the serial killer before he changes his face, you have Jotaro and why am I blanking? Koichi together. And they also have a really fun dynamic. And the show actually kind of wraps up with Jotaro telling Koichi that he's like the most dependable guy he's ever known. And then we see them work together in future seasons. Minor spoiler. So I think like the pairings are great. And then of course you see Josuke and Okuyasu together a lot, and their relationship only deepens and becomes more beautiful. I totally ship those two, however you want it. Josuke tearing up when he thought Okuyasu was dead was like one of my favorite moments in the series. He's like resolutely refusing to believe it, but at the same time he knows. Yeah. So I like how they group up the characters.
I really liked. That's okay. I really liked Mikitaka, the one who may or may not be an alien.
It's unclear.
It's never established. Is this person an alien? Is he just crazy?
Why did the arrow bounce off of him? What? And also, even though these characters are introduced really late, they still come back up. Like, after the battle with Highway Star, Yuya pops up again in a later episode helping Josuke out. After the whole thing with Mikitaka, he pops up again later for the weird battle on the, like, electric line tower. And then we also see him at the very end keeping that guy company, which is really sweet. So, I don't know. I like how all the stand users are kind of forced together. Like, the series repeatedly mentions that stand users are drawn together. But then they just kind of go with it and they make a cute little, like, family out of it. It's nice.
Yeah, it's different from the... It starts off, you think, oh, stand users get drawn together in a sort of Highlander the Gathering kind of way. No, like, they're just getting drawn together like, hey, we're a bunch of weird people who have weird powers, but we get along with... But because we found these other weird people who have weird powers, we just kind of get along with each other because we have kindred spirits now.
Yeah. We're all weirdos. Let's be weirdos together.
Yep.
I also want to shout out to the third opening of the show. I think the song is so great. And then it does do some of that stuff I know you were lamenting that they didn't do in the first half of the season, which is the theme song starts to reflect what's happening in the show, because when Kira, spoiler here, gets the power to turn back time by an hour, they do some fun stuff where they reverse the opening theme song. And I really loved that.
Yeah, it reminded me of at the end of Stardust Crusaders.
Yes, and that was obviously peak, but this was close.
yeah, like the end of Stardust Crusaders, where they used the open, where as they were developing the opening when introducing new characters and that sort of thing, like having that shift once we learned what the Dio's stand was, and then learn the full power of Jotaro's stand. Getting the using that to develop that information and to basically show stuff that we were seeing before, but but we weren't necessarily getting what we were seeing because we didn't have the full information. Having that in a similar way here, where using the time rewind stuff, where like it wasn't just it ran backwards, but the way the information was presented in there within the credits felt different as it was being rewound in a situation similar to like listening to a record where you've had whereas they've recorded dialogue that's backwards, like with some of Electric Light Orchestra stuff.
I also think the way they remixed the song for it was really good.
Yep.
It held together, yeah.
I suspect to a degree that may have been actually to get the Electric Light Orchestra callback again.
Yellow reference.
Yellow reference is deliberately planned in terms of hey, we're going to do this in the credits because we know this is where the story's going. With the song, let's do something with the song so that it will work when rewound in this way. Or at least that's what it felt like. I don't have any behind the scenes making of stuff to say for certain.
I also liked the visuals in the opening. I mean, you had everybody doing crazy poses, of course. But that bit where you see Ghost Girl Remy's hand pointing up and then everybody joins her. And there's that big banner behind them that says justice. I don't know. I was into it. It wasn't subtle, but I liked it. It made me happy every time I saw it.
Speaking of...
Has Jojo ever been subtle?
No.
Yeah. Speaking of other unsubtle stuff from the opening credits, I like the bit with like the crosswalk lines behind Kira forming the word killer.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
With the when showing his new identity to remind you, hey, this is the bad guy. He looks different, but he's the bad guy.
Oh, they made that very clear.
He's the killer.
Yep.
He's the killer queen. So let's talk about, this might be a minor spoiler, but I thought the show did something very interesting when they gave Kira's stand a new power, right?
Stand evolution.
They establish Deadly Queen's abilities in his kind of early fight with Jotaro and Koichi, at least some of them. But then later on, when he's in a tight spot, he's talking to his ghost Polaroid dad, and he gets re-stabbed, right, with the arrow, and gains a new power. So this is the first time I think that we've seen a stand.
No, that's the thing. No.
Echoes.
Except for Reverb. Yeah, that's true.
The question is, did the second stab from the dad...
This is the first time we've seen an adult's stand evolve? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, the question is, did the stab just give him another ability, or did Killer Queen evolve?
This is the question.
Killer Queen doesn't visually change like Koichi's echoes or reverb, if you're listening to the dub, changed visually, but it's still very possible.
We also get Killer Queen using another stand, Stray Cat, as like an enhancement to its own abilities, almost like a prosthetic, which is also very cool.
Combo moves,
yeah, combo moves.
Yeah, that was definitely very interesting seeing that stand combination in that way. Other thing I liked is, or found and definitely interesting is, so the first two, technically the first three arcs have had big, epic, climactic battles at the climax between this series, Jojo, and whoever the main antagonist is. Dio in Phantom Blood and Stardust Crusaders, Cars in Battle Tendency, and we get some of that, but like otherwise, like they do set up pretty well here. Is Killer Queen is a dangerous, sneaky stand but is no good in a stand-up fight in the same ways that like yeah.
It mentioned a number of times.
And so basically, as soon as any Jojo manages to get a hand on him, he's kind of done. And this leads to Kira basically getting a tremendously ignominious death. I mean,
you froze for a moment.
Sorry.
So
this leads to Kira getting a tremendously ignominious death.
Absolutely. And it's almost farcical. And I kind of appreciated that, actually.
He deserved it.
But I think it almost had to be that way, because this is one of those things where, like, they had beaten him. He was definitely done. So what were their options? It was either kill him in cold blood or take him to some kind of special stand jail, which I don't think really exists.
A speedway
Federation to figure it out. But he definitely needed to die. So, I mean, that was just like the hand of fate coming in as far as I was concerned.
What did the police report say? Needs a killer.
And then you get to have a final confrontation between him and Remy, the girl he killed, that I loved. I loved it so much. She and Arnold having that final word against his ghostly butt, that was chef's kiss.
Yeah,
it was a real. Like, it gave that sense of catharsis there.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I appreciate the ignominy of like everyone's like, oh God, he's got the killer queen bites the dust ability that will let them, if he detonates this thing, rewind time an hour, and he'll be able to counteract our plans and all this, that, and the other thing, and then random ambulance just right over his head.
And you see the neck go in the direction no neck should go. And everyone's just like, oh, damn! Literally, everyone's like, oh! Which is why it felt almost farcical, but in a good way.
Yeah.
I will say, like, the rewind time thing, I thought was actually really well done for a time loop. And we've seen time loops in many shows, of course. But I really think that this kid Hayato was a great introduction as a character, because the show kind of sits on him for a while. At first he's just like in the background and you're like, oh no, the killer is in a family that has a kid. This is going to be bad. But he just seems like kind of this sullen kid in the background, kind of an antisocial loner. And then we see him start to investigate what's going on. And then he kind of becomes a fully fledged character where we're hearing his internal monologue and everything. There's some child endangerment in the bathroom, which flashed me back to that horrible Polnareff episode. But it never quite reaches that level of cringe. Because Hayato is actually a very resourceful dude, and so you start rooting for him pretty quickly once you start being privy to his inner thoughts. And the whole sequence where he keeps getting sent back in time and is trying to reason his way out of this time loop without killing a bunch of people because of bites the dust is amazing, right? So then by the time you get to the end of the big final battle and Kira is trying to activate bites the dust once again, you're like, after everything we've been through, don't you dare! Like, you are feeling it, you know? I just think it's structured really nicely.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's in part one we were talking about the influence of the two Stevens, Spielberg and King, and you definitely get a bit of that here, particularly with like It, with the resourcefulness of the kids from there, and
I told you the flamethrower. No, sorry, that's the wrong movie.
Yeah.
Carpenters.
Yeah, yes, Carpenter's the thing. But yeah, you get the real sense here of
he's got that scrappy Stranger Things 80s kid energy.
Exactly, except in 1999.
Boom.
So that was really great. So talking about, mention a few more of the new characters we get in this chunk. We mentioned we like Highway Star. and Yuya and Mikitaka.
This guy.
Well, let's talk about some of the evolution of some of the other characters as well, because we get like a second storyline arc with Yukako.
Yes, we do.
And ultimately setting up kind of the evolution of her relationship with Koichi coming out of that. So let's talk about that, because when they're introduced in the first half of the season, their relationship is frankly toxic. But it definitely...
That girl's poison.
That girl is poison. But then she does some work on herself, or tries to.
She grows as a person.
So it's interesting. At the Cinderella stand, obviously very plot relevant later, but also just an interesting concept in general. I feel like it's almost like it's like a monkey's paw kind of stand, where like it gives you what you want, but there's a huge catch. And the goal is to make you feel like you were fine the way you were before you started messing around with the magic. Like, it's interesting.
Yeah, it feels like while this season is set in the 90s, it definitely feels very 80s influenced in a lot of ways here, because there's more than a few like 80s and early 90s like rom-com sort of romantic fantasy kind of movies that have similar concepts about people reinventing themselves in that sort of way, whether it's with male lead characters like with Big. I remember I've seen the synopses of similar series with female or films with female leads as well.
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of like makeover movies, like She's All That, I think, and stuff like that, like early 90s.
Late 80s, early 90s.
Late 80s, early 90s.
Actually, full the 90s into the early aughts.
Yeah, it was a big thing. It's kind of reminiscent of that. My favorite thing about the whole arc of it in the show was just Yukiko was so happy, like, when it was working, and then she got so mad when it stopped working, and she would fly into these rages, and it was like, oh yeah, you're still a little messed up, girl. You got some work yet to do. But, she's still a little bit, like, if I look at her character through a feminist lens, she's still a little bit problematic because her whole being is revolved around her romantic aspirations. But since she's just one member of a very large cast, it doesn't bother me that much. I actually find Ayasuji to be a more interesting character. Like, she's modeled her whole identity around that of the fairy godmother, which is an interesting pick. You know, she wants to grant people's wishes.
I mean, when your power is giving people makeovers, there's not a lot of in literary references.
But I feel like the stand and its power would have arisen out of that aspect of her personality. Because remember, these people are kind of getting stabbed after they've become adults and developed most of their personality.
Okay, but what part of his personality did Akira get people explode out of?
He needed to leave no evidence. It's tidy. He loves that. He likes anything that makes his life smooth and easy. He says a million times, like, I just wanted to live a chill, simple life.
Where I can
kill people with no consequences. Yeah.
I'm just saying, sand does not always depict personality.
That's true.
Yep.
It should. It doesn't. That would be more thematic. But, you know.
Anyway, she's interesting. All these kind of latter half characters are a little bit one note. And I would say that Yukiko, even though she is present in both halves of the show, is also slightly one note, although she definitely goes through changes as a character. Again, it's all revolving around her romantic aspirations.
She changes method, but not like goal. Like, she's still doing the same thing, she's just doing it in a different way.
You get the sense that if Koichi looks at her and says, babe, you're being crazy, she'd be like, oh, okay, I'll rein it in, you know what I
No, I get more of. Well, I mean, by the end, yes. At the beginning, you're being crazy. What did you? What is it you against me?
I actually think Koichi takes a back seat for most of the second season, but that it works with his character. He gets a lot right up at the beginning when they're confronting Kira before Kira changes his face. He and Jotaro have this whole fight, and Jotaro gets knocked out, and he has to take over, right? And then Koichi actually kind of disconnects a little bit from Josuke and Okuyasu, and we see him more often on his own, going about his own business. And this makes perfect sense because Koichi is more mature than both of them. This is pretty obvious from how they act, right? And then also because he and Yukiko start dating, he again kind of achieves a different level of maturity from Josuke and Okuyasu and goes off and has almost more of a normal life experience, right? Josuke and Okuyasu continue their wacky hijinks together.
I think of the supporting cast members, I would say definitely that Koichi, of all of the JoJo supporting cast members we've had so far, by nature of the circumstances he's able to have, because we are in a single location, it lets characters have their own lives outside of the main plot. And in a way, because we get the storylines, the romance storylines with Koichi and with Yukako, that gives them that opportunity to have that life outside of the plot that the other characters don't have. Similar way, in a weird way, with Rohan, because we know that Rohan, he's a mangaka. We could, whenever he's researching, whenever he enters into the plot, it is, with the exception of when he's explicitly going, I'm going to focus my attention on hunting down a killer. It is, he's doing something related to his manga that causes him and the plot to collide.
Rohan is an interesting character. I have mixed feelings about him, to be sure. I think, I really enjoy how they make the setting such a beautiful, grounded reality of the show. I was just thinking when you were talking about how, the characters are having their own lives and stuff. There is some hijinks that result in Rohan's house partially being burned down. Next episode, if it goes to Rohan's house, we see the scaffold up against the side of the house, indicating the repairs. He has someone come to his house to assess the damage that Kira's father stabs with the arrow to make an enemy stand. These hijinks that they get into have consequences on the setting that then perpetuate into further hijinks, which I think is one of the show's greatest strengths. It really does feel cohesive. These people are all living together in the same place. That's one of my favorite things about the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in most other series, Rohan would be a villain. And in this one, I'm just glad they have the villain on their side.
That's
because he could so easily, with just a tiny tweak of his character, be a serial killer just like Kira, only instead of obsessing over people's hands, he's just reading their stories and turning that into art.
Yeah, he was introduced as a villain.
Yeah.
And whenever he appears in the show, you're not sure what his angle is, morally speaking. I think he kind of turns a corner after he meets Remy, whom he knew as a child, and realizes, there's this mystery going on, and he is, as we have seen, somewhat insatiably curious. So that's, how he gets roped into looking for Kira, I think, even to doing investigations on his own without the rest of the team. But we also see that he is quick to whip out Heaven's Door just immediately. On meeting a new person, that's just the first thing he does. And he just writes on their face, you can't harm Rohan. Which on the one hand seems very pragmatic, but on the other is okay, well, you're just casually
taking overriding
will of others. Yeah. I think in the Highway Star episode, when he sees what he thinks is Kira killing someone in the tunnel, his first instinct is not, I need to go help that victim. His first instinct is, aha, the mystery I've been trying to solve, the person I've been looking for. Gotta go get it. Like, so, it's very, very interestingly kind of... He doesn't have Jojo morality, let's put it that way. He's not exactly a Jobro.
Like I said, I'm glad that villain's on their side.
Alright. Any other final thoughts on Diamond is Unbreakable? Now that we've seen the entirety of it.
This is definitely... For people who are just getting into JoJo, if you don't want to start at Phantom Blood, I think Diamond is Unbreakable is an excellent jumping on point, because it is sort of the start of a whole new series about people and their developing stands. Also, just Josuke is much more of a standard late 90s, early 2000s shonen protagonist.
Truth.
Like, he has that energy. He has that Yusuke Urameshi energy. Okuyasu is very Kuwabara. Like, that street tough, very standard. Like, presented initially very similar looking to the young Jotaro, but personality-wise, the two could not be more different.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's an excellent jumping on point for people who want to start JoJo. And just thoroughly enjoyed it. It holds together really, really well.
Couple more things I loved in no particular order. I loved that Jotaro is a character, but he is not a main character. Like, despite being presented as one in like the series opening and closing, he's there as kind of a holdover from the previous elements of the series that have been formed with the new series. And then he's only really a major player in that fight with Koichi, and he's knocked out, right, by a bomb. I love that they were not afraid to take their badass, very popular, aloof male protagonist and say, okay, he's here, but this isn't his story. We're just gonna scoot him aside. I love that the entire time he was in Morio, he was researching a sea snail or something for his PhD. That just makes me smile.
Masters.
No, they say PhD in the English dub.
Okay, so, all right. So I watched this on Netflix with the Japanese subtitles, and there they had it be the Masters.
That would make more sense given his age, right?
Yeah.
No, because he's the right age. He's about 28 in this show. He's that age where he'd be finishing up his PhD.
I need to know if he's Dr. Jotaro Kujo or not.
I believe he does get the doctorate later. But
I love it.
So you still get Dr. Kujo, but yeah, like but yeah, I do appreciate the fact that like the lead protagonist of the third arc and the lead protagonist of the second arc are present, but neither of them are necessarily in a position where they are taking over the story. And in fact, theoretically, Hermit Purple could have come up for trying to find the identity of what Kira had taken.
It's like, isn't that why Joseph showed up in the first place?
But instead he doesn't.
He has to take her a baby.
Yep.
I mean, that is one thing I do enjoy about Jotaro. The series is at least that I've watched so far, is that they always have someone from the previous series show up at the beginning to sort of pass the baton to the next protagonist.
I also love in the last episode when they're sailing away, Joseph and Jotaro are like, are we worried about this? Like, are they going to be okay? And then Joseph is like, he says something like, yeah, the hearts of the young people in this town have the same spirit like we witnessed on our journey to Egypt. Like, they're good people and they're going to take care of things. So, like, literally passing the baton over.
And then we immediately see.
And
then
then
we go to Italy in the next season.
Like, and then Josuke steals his wallet, which was just the best possible ending because Joseph and his shenanigans, the man deserved it. Okay, I think.
And not to mention,
like he can't afford it.
It's not like he can't afford it.
And also, like, as we established way back in Battle Tendency, Joseph totally would have done the same thing.
Exactly. It's like, this is your kid, dude. Deal with it.
Yeah.
Other things I loved. I loved sitcom moments like when Josuke was driving on a motorcycle and stealing people's phones as he drove by to call for backup. And the first person he stole from was about to make a billion-yen deal over the phone. And the second person he stole a phone from was about to propose marriage over the phone. Just like sitcom stuff like that. I love it. I love how Josuke and Okuyasu were so close by the time they meet Mikitaka that they literally have like a psychic conversation. Love that so much. I love the 3 biker gang groupie girls. I don't even know why. I just I think they're great.
Yeah.
I love that there was a lampshade on how ridiculous Highway Star was, because ostensibly the stand was stealing nutrients from people to heal his user in the hospital, but that makes no sense because the hospital would be administering all the nutrients needed via IV, which is then shown when Josuke uses the guy's IV bag to replenish himself and overcome Highway Star's attack.
And then just proceeds to heal him with his own stand. It's like, great, you're healed now. So now you're not crippled. So I can, in full confidence, kick your ass.
I love it when the show is just aware of how ridiculous it is. I love how the hijinks, like I said, have lasting impacts. Like, we saw Josuke and Okuyasu pulling that scam to win lottery money. And then, like, later we find out that his mom found out and froze his account so he can't use any of it. Or, like, the guy with the lock stand returning after his own hospital stay. Pretty much just to referee a dice battle between Josuke and Rohan. I'm pretty genius. One that they all got so caught up in they didn't notice the house was on fire.
It happens to the best of us.
These guys. Anyway, my final thought is kind of like, the show is really fun because it is good at setting up rules and expectations, right? So we know that if X happens, Y will happen. But it keeps it very fresh because each stand has its own different set of rules and expectations. So it didn't quite reach the level for me like it did in Battle Tendency and Stardust Crusaders, where it was like, he knows that I know, so I'll do this. But what if he knows that I know that he knows? But what if he knows that I know that he knows that he... Like, you know what I mean? Instead, it's a little bit more organic. Because they're talking out loud as they're reasoning through the rules of each enemy stand. And you can see their thought process. And so it manufactures drama, because you know when they make a mistake and stuff. So I think the formula is really great. And then you add to that the amazing characters... and the really cool setting, and the art style, which is my favorite out of all the JoJo art styles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's awesome. I love this show so much.
So check it out.
Indeed. So a couple last minute points on separate stuff. Before we get to what we'll be covering next month, quick thing I forgot to mention at the start of the show. I went to see the Bebop Bounty Big Band, a Cowboy Bebop Big Band concert at cool. the Aladdin Theater in Portland, the day previous to this recording. By the time this episode goes up, there will be concert performances tour performances still scheduled in Seattle, Spokane, New York City, and I forget which states in the South. I'm going to have a vlog post up on the YouTube channel discussing the concert and that sort of thing. If I was going more in depth, but I will just say I absolutely recommend going to see this show if they play if the band plays near you. It's whether you are a fan of jazz, a fan of Cowboy Bebop, or ideally a fan of both. Which really, if you're a fan of Cowboy Bebop,
Probably, yeah.
you've kind of got hooked into jazz. Definitely recommend going to see that show. And with that, next month we are doing a movie double feature. We will be doing My Neighbor Totoro and Akira.
What? Those two could not be more different, Alex.
No. I get the logic. I see it. There are two very early full film adaptations brought to the US, given actual cinema releases. I see the logic behind the decision. I get that.
They both came out. Also both came out the exact same year.
Yeah.
So I loved Totoro as a young woman, and I made my dad rent it for me from the video rental store when those were still a thing, a million times. So now as an adult, I have both dub versions. We have the Disney version and the original Fox version. Which one do you want me to watch?
That is actually
because I knew how much you liked it, so I got the Disney one, and you were like, "No, it's not the same."
It's not the same.
Okay, I get that. So I hunted down the original one, which had been out of production for like 15 years at that point.
So I will say, if you want to do a comparison, that is definitely worth doing. The Fox dub, the Fox dub is actually that one is produced by Streamline, and there is a fun bit of trivia about that release as far as like how it originally came to be in the US that I will save for next month's episode.
Exciting.
Let's just say the release you have has the Fox label on it, but Fox wasn't the ones who put it, or the parent company who produced that release in the US originally. And the reason for Akira, again, came out the same year. Like My Neighbor Totoro was a big gateway anime for a lot of people. And it fits structurally kind of with the concept of the double feature that My Neighbor Totoro was originally a part of. The second half of that, technically the first half of that double feature was Grave of the Fireflies. However, Grave of the Fireflies is out of print on DVD at the moment and not available for streaming anywhere, which it feels like for as much of a repeated series of emotional gut punches that Grave of the Fireflies is. This feels like a thing that if G-Kids wasn't going to license rescue it again after Sentai Filmworks let it lapse, after they in turn got it after Central Park Media let it lapse, this felt like the kind of thing where, frankly, the Criterion Collection would go yoink, because this is like up there with among another movie that they currently have the rights to that is similarly emotionally traumatizing. The film Come and See, in terms of harsh and brutal depictions of war. Then again, we also live in the world where I think, I'll have to double check, but I think like Barefoot Gen is out of print, which is another movie that honestly should stay in print forever.
Barefoot Gen, a friend just told me, the manga is still in print, and that's readily available.
Yeah, so. Manga is still in print, but the film is not, which, there's an interesting conversation to be had comparing, the ways that, Barefoot Gen and Grave of the Fireflies depict wartime Japan, as far as life in wartime Japan and the impacts of Allied bombings on Japan. They're different types of bombings, but still. However, I will say up front to our listeners, I do not have the emotional bandwidth to double feature those two films back to back. So,
I can just tell you right now, I'm not going to ever sit through Grave of the Fireflies. No,
If you want a less traumatizing movie that still touches on that time period, Miyazaki's The Wind Rises is a really interesting film, especially if you're any kind of creative. It's about, well, you know what? I won't even say anything more. It's a very good, very interesting film, like all of his films, but specifically set, in the wartime period.
And immediately post-World War II Japan, a fantastic film has, I think, just made it to Netflix 2 weeks ago as of recording, maybe, and that is Godzilla -1, which is an amazing film about post-war Japan, even if you take out the big lizard.
Yeah. Other recommendation I would do on that front, on the anime side, something a little less fantastical, I would go with Tomorrow's Joe. The main character in that is a boxer in post-war Japan. Explicitly, he's introduced being paid to throw matches for U.S. occupation GIs. So there's that aspect of that there as well. So there's some good picks there, but like again, next month 2 films. So if you're watching along, this is probably more manageable. If you go in with the physical releases, I will say that for Akira, most of the releases from the Bandai release onto the Funimation release, even the most recent 4K release, will have both the new Bandai dub and the original Streamline Pictures dub. So you have options there.
I'm going to have to reread Akira again.
All right, and that's what we'll be covering next month. In the meantime, if you enjoyed what you heard, please consider backing the Patreon at patreon.com/count0or. Patreon backers will get access to blog posts, episodes of the podcast, my YouTube videos, and all that wonderful stuff up to 1 week in advance. If a monthly subscription is not your thing, please consider going. You can toss some cash in the Ko-fi tip jar at ko-fi.com/count0. Anything you can toss in helps cover hosting costs and all that wonderful stuff. All right, and that cover. Oh, and also because these videos go up on my YouTube channel as well, if you're listening to them there, please like, subscribe, ring the bell, and all that wonderful stuff.
And feel free to email us.
Oh, yes, we have an email address at animeexplorations@gmail.com. If you send us an email, we may read it on the podcast. All right, and because we don't have any emails read to the podcast at the moment, we don't have any emails to read. So until next time, thank you all very much for listening, and we will see you, or we will be in your feed next month.
Bye.
Happy summer.
Alex, quick question. When are we doing Utena? Okay. All right. Okay. I just got an alert off of Crunchyroll that all 3 seasons are on sale. So I'm like, should I do it now? Okay.
Shall we do it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I remember going to write stuff. I'm like, okay, what do you mean it closed down? Why am I being directed to Crunchyroll? No! This library is tiny in comparison.
Did you see that Kaiju number 8 this week didn't have a dub? Like the dub fell behind? It's so good though. Just saying.
He has other stuff.
I know. We'll get there.
All right. Yes. Okay.
Akira and Totoro, really?
I get it.
Cool.
Oh, fun!
Nice. Has he not seen it either?
Oh my god!
Prepare yourself, sir. Okay, alright.
Oh, I should turn off the record.